Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Go Camp Pro. We have created and are dedicated to this podcast because we believe that staff training is one of, if not the most important part of your job as a camp director. Staff training is what prepares your staff to care for their kids, to feel confident in their skills, to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to learn along the way. A well thought out and intentional staff training will help you in more ways than you can imagine. And we need to help each other bring our very best. So let's start today by sharing with you who we are. So Ruby, let's hear from you first, please.
My name is Ruby Compton. I'm the Chief Exploration Officer for Ruby Outdoors, and that is a company that I started a couple of years ago to be able to work in support of the camp industry, primarily in Western North Carolina, but I support camps all over the world, and in any way that I can, be it bus driving, teaching, lifeguarding, or raft guiding down a river.
Thanks, Ruby. And she is currently in Colorado, where she's just finished some training there. So it's nice to have you with us from the West Coast. And Gabrielle.
Well, my name is Gabrielle Rail, and I'm one of the camp director at Camp Oro. Camp Oro is celebrating their 99th anniversary this summer, and we focus on creating a positive female community. And we do that while speaking in French and in English.
Excellent. Thanks, Gab. And I'm Beth Allison. I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and Go Camp Pro. And I was a camp director and an executive director for many years, but now I have the privilege of working as a camp consultant. And my focus is intentional leadership training. And our topic for today's podcast is what to do about staff who aren't so great at the very beginning. And we're talking about the first couple of weeks of camp, not during training. So Ruby, can you tell us why we decided to talk about this today, please?
Sure. Well, I think we've probably all, as camp directors, seen that situation where you have a camper who's maybe one of your most challenging campers, but then often they end up being some of the most devoted staff or devoted campers, and sometimes most devoted staff. I think that can be true for staff as well, that you have folks that maybe don't start off the summer great, but often or sometimes those folks can really turn it around, especially if they have the right leadership around them.
Excellent. So sometimes we have to decide, are we going to work with this staff member? Is it worth the effort to put in not only on our part, but on their part as well? And so Ruby, can you start off with telling us what are some things to look for when we know that we want to actually put the work in and we think that there is great potential to be harvested there?
For sure. Well, first and foremost, you can't teach people to care. And so if somebody comes into the job and they care about it, they want to do well, they take ownership of their position, that is one of the biggest factors for me about whether somebody stays or leaves. I'm looking for, are there just very clear skill deficits? If there are skill deficits, things they just do not know how to do, that's something we can tackle. When you're talking about somebody's attitude, or somebody's refusal to learn, that makes it a lot less interesting to invest in them.
Great, I agree completely. Gab, have you got anything else to add to that list?
Also, do they have an awareness of that they're having a hard time? If they're really, really unaware, are they open to hearing that they are having a difficult time, and are they open to learning? So for me, awareness, and of course, caring is very important.
Great, thanks, Gab. And I'm not sure that I would necessarily add too much to that list. I think one of the things Travis and I did when we were directing was we always hired for character and trained skill. And so when they have the heart for camp, that's really what you're looking for. Now, there are some times when they have the heart for camp, but it still isn't the right fit. And so we can talk a bit about that as the podcast goes on, but I think you're really looking for somebody who has that heart for camp, really wants to do their best, and really wants to put the effort in to become that staff member that they want to be. So Ruby, why don't you start us off by giving us some ideas about how we can do that? We've decided we're going to keep them. We see that they're struggling, but how can we help them?
For sure. So I think first and foremost is to address it. Don't let this fester and talk about it behind their back. I think pull that person aside, pull them into a formal meeting, whatever it looks like, but take some time and just say, hey, how's camp going for you? And I've noticed this. It seems like this has been challenging, or it seems like this maybe hasn't been a great fit. So tell me how you're feeling right now so we can try to find a way to get you to be more successful. I remember my very first summer that I worked at a summer camp. I was a camp counselor at a big YMCA camp. And we had a staff member who, like, all through training, you kind of had this sense of like, I don't know if this guy's a great fit for camp. And within that first week, we had I guess we started off with 2-week sessions, but within the first week, he had a group, and it was quickly determined that perhaps maybe he wasn't best working with the kids every single day as a group leader, as a counselor, but maybe if he was swapped onto the program side, if he was like at the ropes course, where there was a little bit more time in between, a little bit more time for mentorship from other staff, that might actually be a better situation. And he was phenomenal on rope staff. And he still got the kid time, but that gave him a little more space to learn. It gave him a little more space to see other people interacting with children so he could learn those techniques. And then later on in the summer, he could jump in and be a counselor on a day that we needed somebody to sub in, and his skills were there. A lot of times when you have a camp counselor, it may be that they are the only person that's really with that group for the whole day, especially in a day camp setting, but even in an overnight setting. And so if you can set them up to be in a space where potentially they have more opportunities to learn from those who've been in the organization or been at camp a little bit longer, or just straight up, like maybe they just need some different responsibilities. And hopefully those different responsibilities will give them an opportunity to learn some of those skills. And I think in that situation, him needing to step back and like learn the ropes course stuff, he was able to pick up pretty quickly. And then the interpersonal stuff came along the way. So again, a really honest conversation, I think, about it. Get their input. Also have like very specific examples of what you've seen, and not only the things that you've seen that aren't working, but the qualities that you see that are working, and the strengths that you do think they bring to the table. Because if you're having this conversation, you're probably seeing something that you like. You're probably seeing some reason you want to keep them around. So make sure you point those out, and then we can talk about the things that aren't going so well and how we can address them.
Great. Thanks, Ruby. How about you, Gab? What would you start off with?
For me, I need to connect with the staff member genuinely, in the sense of what do I appreciate about them? Because sometimes when a staff member is having a hard time, it's possible that the leadership team member or the director haven't, to help them find a path, you need to genuinely care about them. And sometimes it's frustrating when staff members aren't doing a great job. And if you approach that person with sort of an air of frustration, or, you just wish they could just do what they were you taught them to do, you're not starting on the right foot. So you want to be hopeful when you're walking in. You want to see this person succeed. So connecting with them on a genuine level of what you appreciate about them. You don't need to voice that to them, but you just you centering yourself in that feeling, I find very, very helpful. And then the other thing I'm looking at is their self-esteem level. Are they feeling good about themselves? Are they over cocky, or we talked about awareness, or most likely 9 times out of 10 they're not feeling great about themselves. They know they're not doing a great job, and their self-esteem is lower. And you even see this in sports. If you're feeling like you're not doing great, then all aspects of your game is also low. So how can you provide opportunities for their self-esteem to go up? Some of it has to do maybe with conversations. Other has to do with actually providing them moments of leadership, moments of other people seeing them in a positive light, because they haven't had that opportunity. And some of the things that you can do with that is having a paired sharing about what I appreciate about you. And you can do that during staff meetings, where you pair people up and you say, I saw you do this, and I appreciate this about you. And of course, that's great for everybody, but you can make sure you're partnering that person with somebody that is going to say something very positive and concrete. And then the next thing is building that trust with the person. Does that person have trust with you, so that they are hearing the truth about what needs to be addressed? And involve them in the long-term game. Tell them that you want them to to be here to the end. You want them leaving feeling successful, but right now we're not at success yet. But I know we can get there. There's a couple of things we're going to need to adjust so that you can get there. And just bringing them in on the big picture, I find is helpful, so they know that you have a plan, but we're also not hiding the fact that they're struggling, and that struggle is okay, but we will have to make some adjustments.
Great. Thanks, Gab. And that kind of brings us to that, you know, favorite camp saying, I can't yet.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm going to tell you that you need to start with front loading, and that there are things you need to tell your staff before the campers ever arrive. So with all of your staff, make sure your expectations are clear from the beginning. Sometimes the reason staff struggle is because they were not aware of what was expected of them in their roles. And this isn't their fault, this is our fault. So do your best now to, and I mean now in February, to figure out all that you need to front load with them about their responsibilities this summer. And start now, as soon as or even before you hire them. There should be very few surprises for them as they begin their new jobs. Of course, there will always be something we didn't anticipate or see coming. That's the nature of working with people. But we need to do our best to be sure they know what to do in a number of situations they're likely to find themselves in, like campers missing home, or getting hurt, or being bullied, or acting out, or being scared to try something new, and so on. These answers that you come up with will also help you shape your training so that your people are as prepared as possible and are set up for success. And secondly, if we're going to help our people in any way, for me, we need to work on establishing, and Gab has already touched on this, an environment of trust where they can share the issues and the problems so that when the time comes, they will feel comfortable with you in a direct dialogue or with whomever their supervisor would be. So we've done several episodes on building community and trust. So have a listen to some of those if you're looking for more ideas on that, because we can't stress enough how important that is. So for me, you've worked now on preparing them as best you can and developing a positive relationship with them, but then you notice, or it's brought to your attention by other staff, that they are having some difficulties. And despite our best efforts and all that we've put into training, some staff are simply not fully ready for their campers. And yet campers have arrived. So for me, before we sit down to talk with them about our concerns, we need to take a minute and ask ourselves some questions. So questions like, have I been clear about our goals as a staff? How can I make these clearer now and in the future so we don't wind up in this place again? What examples or details can I provide to clarify the level that I'm looking for? Am I being respectful of the amount of time that they have to accomplish something and they're just not getting it done in that time? Can I be doing a better job supporting my staff? Do they feel like they're being set up to fail in any way? Are my expectations realistic? And of course, do they have the tools and resources to do that job well? So like, have I given them enough context about why this work is so important? Have I helped them understand the why behind it all? And only after you have done some work here should you approach that staff member who appears to be having some difficulties. So I would stop and ask yourself, how do you know that they're struggling? And as Gab says to us all the time, don't jump to conclusions when you see something. Always take the time to dig a little bit deeper, figure out what's going on. They may be struggling, or they may have had a good reason for what happened, or this was just a one-off and they'll handle it better next time. Just take that time to observe and get a little more information before you bring them into your office or wherever you're going to have that conversation and say, it appears to me like you're having some struggles and some difficulties. And then that open conversation that Ruby was talking about will be easier because you've worked on building that trust from the moment you've hired them, and you can identify the root cause of the underperformance. It's the only way to determine how you should proceed. So work with that staff member to identify the roadblocks or the barriers to them doing this job well and the causes for that. And they may need some help with this. Their anxiety and their stress levels, and we know those are much higher now in staff than they were even 5 years ago, can get in the way of them seeing the problem for what it is and then seeing any possible solutions. And it might be that a lot of staff are struggling with a particular issue, and that means, of course, that you didn't do a great job in teaching it at training. So you'll need to work in some time when you can do some retraining on a specific topic that keeps popping up over and over. So when can you bring in a portion of staff and then do it as many times as you need so that everyone has had a chance for that retraining? So make a list, and you might want to do this on your own first, but then I would absolutely do it with the staff member. And they're very likely to come up with a similar list, but this will also help you to know if they're capable of seeing those issues at hand, or perhaps they even see ones or feel that they're struggling with issues that you haven't even noticed yet. And I would be, and I think Ruby's touched on this too, or maybe Gab, but be really real with your feedback. Staff need our honesty, and of course in a very kind and compassionate way, but we have to be upfront with them. They already likely know that they're really struggling. So they'll trust you more if you're honest, but you can also show them that you're happy to work with them and to help them get to where they want to be. Everybody wants to do well. The other thing I would do is decide who that coach will be as they work through this. So maybe you already have a head counselor in place or a section head. It might be you, but it needs to be somebody who can consistently work with them over the summer. And if your staff is smaller, it can be somebody with experience and who can mentor them throughout the summer. But it's always really helpful, I think, for consistency if it's the same person that they can go to. So together, create a plan with some really concrete goals, and I would have them sign the plan in your conversation. It's a collaboration, and staff needs to know that you're working together on this. The other thing I would do is, well, knowing exactly where they stand with their goals and with your expectations, it will make those performance conversations easier if things continue to go off track, or if they get back on track and then fall off track throughout the summer somewhere. So being really transparent both with goals and expectations also really helps to clear the air, and it gives your staff that defined path to hitting goals and shows them too that you really care about seeing them succeed. Ruby, what else have you got to share with us today?
For sure. So I love what you just said about there being kind of a mentor or coach. And I think it is important to look at the possibility of bringing some other people in to continuing to train this person. Be that a leadership team member, be that their direct supervisor. And I think a one-on-one conversation with that person, kind of saying, here's the objective, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I think is really good. You may even start that conversation with, how's it going supervising that person, right? And encourage them to bring back some pretty honest feedback. Because sometimes like if you don't feel like you have that trusting relationship with that person as the director, it may be that they have started to build that trusting relationship with their direct supervisor. And so that person may be able to give you some more information, and may also be the best person to approach them first. So consider what that space looks like, but that honest conversation I think is really important. Another technique that, again, we use with kids all the time that I think we should consider in this situation is to give that staff member a special job, right? Like give them the camper who everyone else seems to be struggling with a little bit and say, this is your response. Like, I want to see if you can connect with this kid and just focus on this one person. Because I've also seen, as you all said earlier, sometimes you have staff who aren't doing phenomenally, but they just need a little bit of room to shine. And I've seen more often than not, I've seen staff members that are not doing great end up in a situation where you go like, oh no, that's the staff member that's there. And then they totally rise to the occasion. That's not going to happen every time, right? But I've certainly, like I said, seen that happen more often than not. So consider, is there a way that you can give them some space to shine, give them that special job, and then check in on it. And that'll help boost that confidence and self-esteem like Gabs was talking about.
Excellent. Thanks, Ruby. Gab, what else have you got?
Just to add on what both of you are talking about, when we're a lot of times when staff members are struggling, we do rely on returning staff members or older staff members to be a buddy, to be a co-counselor. And I think to front load at the beginning of the summer with your second, third year, fourth year staff members that aren't on leadership team, that their role and responsibility now, not when they were first year, but now certainly that they're second or third year, is to not only do their job with campers, but it's to it's to mentor and role model with other staff members. And we want to, if that happens where you're pairing a strong staff member with a weaker staff member, is very important to talk to that returning staff member and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and these are our goals. Because they know immediately when they hear their names called out and they're paired with somebody that's weaker, automatically their motivation goes down. They can see that they're going to be carrying the majority of the load, and you want to be their teammate in this. And so you also want to ask them how they want to go about it. And you also want to bring them in on what the big picture is, that you're excited. We see some potential in this person, and we think that you can help them get there. But these are the things that we're going to do that. And also bring that person, the other person that you're helping in on that conversation, not necessarily face to face, but let them know that this is the goal as well. And so that the other person is there to role model and mentor for them. And I think that starts to set a precedent within your organization, that your community isn't just about, it's about everybody lifting each other up. And that's the goal. And that's what we do within our camp. We do not all come in at 100%. We come in at different strengths. We all have different aptitudes, and we do need to support each other in the learning curve. And then, as we had mentioned, was checking in with that person so that they're not feeling like they are, the burdens on their shoulders. So definitely talk with people that will be assisting if that's one of the pieces that you decide that you're going to put in place to help them. I think the other thing is also deciding within yourself or your leadership team, when is it time to let this person go? If this person cannot achieve what you need them to achieve, if you've done all of the things that was necessary, all the steps, you signed the contract on how we're going to improve, but nothing's really shifting, is it best to let them go for the sake of the staff, for the sake of that person? Make that decision beforehand so that you have at least something where you're not keeping somebody well beyond well beyond the time that they need to leave, because that can add a negative effect to the rest of your staff. And I do know that we're, as camp directors, struggling to keep staff. I know it's hard to get staff, but keeping somebody on staff that's bringing everybody down can have a negative ripple effect. So also within your management team, make sure that you've had those conversations as well.
Great. Thanks, Gab. I think it's important that we remember that most of our staff won't actually be fully ready at the start of the summer, and that we can't be too upset about this. We need to be patient and give them some of that extra time that they need, because for many of us, it's our very first job, and it's a huge one, taking care of others' children, keeping them safe and healthy, but also on top of that, creating opportunities for them to grow in countless ways. It's an enormous responsibility. And if this is their first job, it's a lot to expect them to be fully prepared in a week or so of training. I would also, in this instance, pull out my handy competency grid before I sat down with that staff member. So I didn't create this idea, but I've been using it for so long, I actually don't remember where I found it. But you draw a grid that looks a lot like the small letter T, and in the top left section, you put consciously competent. Top right is unconsciously competent. Bottom left, consciously incompetent, and bottom right, unconsciously incompetent. And once you've done a bit of research to figure out exactly where their struggles lie, you decide where that staff member sits on that grid. And your efforts will be very different depending on where they sit. So if they're unconsciously competent, maybe they just need to know to hear some feedback from you to show them that they actually do know what they're doing. If they're consciously incompetent, and that's when we need to step in and help them figure out the areas that they need to work on. So that grid always really helped me to sort of target where I was going to go with those kinds of conversations. And I would maybe find a staff member or two who excel in the area that this staff member does not. And I would ask that staff member for their input. Who do you think handles this part of the job really well that you're struggling with? And ask them then to watch and listen and learn from this person or these people. Maybe even have them sit down together to share some pointers and tips, because often we need to actually see people doing it right to really understand what goes into the job. And after a few days of observation, sit down with your staff person and ask them, what is it that they saw? What is it that they heard? What did the other staff member actually do that was smart and caring and thoughtful? What exactly did they do that worked? And of course, I think that we need to praise them when we catch them doing it right. Too often we focus on when they don't get it exactly the way we want it. So there's nothing like positive reinforcement. So have your leadership team members report into you also when they have seen this staff member doing it right. And of course, they've probably already they've mentioned it to the staff member themselves, but it's really helpful for them, for you to have those eyes and ears out there to share the good news with you. And also, if the struggle continues, and Ruby talked about this too, figure out if they're in the right role. So I have a story much like Ruby's. We had a staff member years ago who went through our LIT program, became a counselor, and then a program specialist at the waterfront. She was a very trustworthy employee who always wanted to do her best and tried to do her best, but she never really thoroughly excelled in either one of these areas. And we always knew that we needed to support her through the summers more than the usual person, and it always made her feel less than. And finally, one year, we tried her in the kitchen because she had shown some interest there. And all of a sudden, she became like a superstar. She rose up through the ranks. She eventually became the kitchen manager, and she was awesome at that job. She was great at supervising her kitchen crew. She got them excited about special program meals. She found time to stay involved in the rest of camp by leading songs at campfire, by being creative in announcements, by being a good listening ear for other staff members who would go to her during their hour off, and like they would stand with her and help chop vegetables or something just so that they could share their problems with her. So sometimes when the struggle is there, you just have to find the right fit. Anything else either one of you has to add before we wrap up? Nothing at all. Okay.
No, that's great.
I have a couple more, but nothing real big. But another front-loading idea to do with them at training is to let them know that everyone will have an area or two that they need to work on and need extra support in, and that that's totally okay. So that if they hear that before the campers arrive, and then they do wind up in that situation, they're not super bummed about it. They know that that's always a possibility. So maybe during training, you could also have a few more senior staff members share some things that they struggled with when they first started and how they worked with you or with their team or with their supervisor to overcome them. And maybe that it wasn't necessarily a super quick fix, like one conversation and boom, but it took time to work on and to get it right. I think hearing from other people that they're not perfect out of the gate and that there are people at camp to help you is really powerful, especially if you do it before it happens, so that the staff will understand that this is normal and that they can come to you with issues, or whomever their designated support person is. Maybe you could even share some of your own struggles about when you were first starting out. I think that this can also help to really encourage an open dialogue, because if you've been in camp for 10, 15, 20 years, you probably look pretty good doing most things. And what we can't do is be afraid to say, you know, it took me time to feel really competent and really confident in my job. Um, I would also make sure that we're providing consistent feedback. So not just when they need some correction, but set up a system where you can monitor that performance regularly. So with our staff, we did CEDOs, and of course this is from the brilliant mind of Michael Brandwein. So continual development of skills, and we met with our staff member at least every 10 days. So every week and a half, we sat down with every single individual on staff. And we can help teach our supervisors to be team leaders and raise that level of staff performance. So working time in your schedule to meet with every single staff member, either weekly or bi-weekly or somewhere in between, can help to communicate expectations firmly but positively. It can help solve problems, and it can coach staff to be their very best. So I met with my leadership team members once a week. Our associate director met with our program staff, because there were more of them, about every 10 days, and our head counselor met individually with our counselors every 2 weeks. And these were ongoing, even if everything was going super smoothly, because I made the mistake my first year of directing of really not talking to the people who were doing things well. And I figured, oh, you don't need to hear from me, you know you're doing great. They didn't always know that. So I learned that lesson. So we would meet for 10 minutes, no more, We discussed how things were going. We figured out ways to help with any issues. And then we set a goal for the next meeting, which the staff then wrote down and signed. And when we met again, we went over the goal, discussed how they met it or not, and either set a new goal or figured out ways that we could work to meet the last goal. Of course, these didn't take the place of one-on-one meetings when there were obvious problems. We didn't wait to sit down for a CETOS with the staff member to talk about an immediate concern, but staff knew that these meetings were there to help them become better at their jobs and to dig deeper to become the person that they wanted to be, and that they weren't alone with this. So when you sit down to talk with them, you really have that opportunity to sort of gain their confidence and help them manage a way back into meeting the expectations of their role. And sometimes it is inevitable. A staff member needs to move on or be let go. But if a director takes some of these steps that we've talked about today, this can end up being more of a positive experience than you would expect without the animosity that sometimes follows a breakup. So I would say if I had to narrow it down, there's sort of 3 keys, I guess, for helping an underperforming staff member. And those would be explain, ask, involve, and appreciate. So we need to clearly describe why something needs to change. So that's the explain part. We need to confirm that the staff understands this issue, which is the ask part. We need to discuss ideas for potential solutions and approaches, which is the involve part. And then, of course, the appreciate is recognize their positive efforts in order to encourage more progress towards that agreed upon goal. So Gab, I think we have reached the time in our podcast that you're going to recap for us today.
It's recap time. Beth, you did a really great job with that little recap, so we're just going to leave that as that. But here are a couple of things to keep in mind before chatting with a staff member. Maybe ask yourself, do they have a heart for camp? Meaning, are they there for the campers? Are they there to support staff members? Are they there because they enjoy nature or contributing to the community as a whole? Do they have a heart for camp? That's very important. If they do not, maybe this is not the right place for them. Do they have the tools and or the support to do the job well? That's an assessment on yourself and your staff training. Were expectations set? Did you front load properly during staff training? Assess why they are struggling. Can you adjust some of their roles and or responsibilities? Do you think that they're willing and or aware of some of the issues that they're having? Once you notice that there are some issues, don't wait to talk to them. Make sure that you are immediately addressing, because we want to have as much time as possible until the end of the summer to make sure that we can put the following things in place, which would be perhaps give them a special job. We want to work on self-esteem, maybe change some of those responsibilities so they are feeling successful. The mentor or the coach should be the same person so that success is well documented and the feedback is concrete. And also, if there are other people that are involved in their success, make sure you're involving them in the big picture, in the plan, such as a co-counselor or support staff. And of course, at the end, show them where they were and where they've come from and where they are now, so that hopefully they're a returning staff member and they'll be able to pay you tenfold next year when they're helping other staff members while they are, going on the process of becoming great staff members.
Excellent recap as always. Thanks, Gab. And here's how you can get involved with us. You can join us on social media with the hashtag #CampCode and let us know the topics you would like us to discuss, any guests you recommend that we should talk to, great leadership training tips that you have to share with us. We would love to hear from you because we are all about sharing in this industry. And if you found our podcast to be useful to you, please leave us a rating and a review for us in iTunes. And of course, you can do that by going to camphacker.tv/cc_iTunes, or you can tweet your love of the show by going to camphacker.tv/campcodelove, because your feedback helps keep the show going. So if you'd like to reach any one of us individually, here's how to do it. Ruby.
So you can reach me, Ruby, at rubyoutdoors.com. You can also check out my Instagram at rubyoutdoors or at Women in Camping. And you can also find me on Twitter at rubylyn85.
Excellent. Thank you. And Gabrielle, how do we find you?
You can check me out on Instagram at Gabrielle Rail. You can also email me at gabs@waro.com, Gabs, G-A-B-Z. And you can check out where I work at waro.com, OUAREAU.com.
It's a lot of spelling from you. Thank you. And you can find out what I do at gocamp.pro. You can reach me directly at beth@gocamp.pro, and I'm on social media as Topaz Faye. And Ruby, for our next podcast, can you tell us what we'll be talking about?
So for our next podcast, we're going to be talking about supporting staff as they move from frontline roles to leadership roles.
Ah, excellent. That's exciting. I didn't know that, so I'm very happy about that. All right. Our final segment on each podcast, of course, is our best practice for leadership training. And again, we would love to hear from you, some of your memorable moments or your most effective tips. And again, you can tell us on social media using the hashtag CampCode. And Ruby has this week's best practice for us.
So this is my request to all camp directors, is to please format your staff training schedule that you give to your staff similarly to how their schedules are going to look during the summer. Go ahead and get them in the practice of looking at that type of schedule, looking at the times. I know that the times that you have during training may be different from the times you're going to have for your campers. But if you can give them a document that's at least sort of similar, I think that goes a long way for them getting their schedule on the first day and having some practice reading, seeing just how to do it. So for instance, the schedule that I had at Green River, we had a more intensive like leadership staff training document and schedule that had all the details. But the one that the staff received looked just like, as it is, the grid was very similar to what we did for our camper schedules, or the schedules that they got, the program calendar they got for each session. And yeah, there are other details that needed to be on there, like where sessions were going to take place, or if there were specific things they needed to bring with them, we could put that on the back side of that piece of paper. Or maybe even every day you have a marker board or a chalkboard or some central place in camp where you have a more detailed list of information. You could even put that in a place where you expect staff to check for announcements each day. So it gets them into that routine of knowing, I have my schedule, but the most up-to-date stuff is going to be in this place. So I need to make sure I check that each day. But please, 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 format your staff training schedule that you're giving to your staff the same way that or similar to, at least, to the schedules that they're going to be using throughout the summer.
Thanks, Ruby. It sounds like it's very important to Ruby that you folks do this. So please, please do this for Ruby. Well, thanks everybody. That wraps things up for today. We really appreciate the opportunity to share things with you. Thanks so much for coming and joining us. And thanks for the listening, friends.